One of the greatest hoaxes in journalism is crumbling, exposed. This hoax that the ABC ran as a three-part series on Four Corners.
Tonight, we begin our special three-part investigation into the story of the century, the election of US President Donald Trump and his ties to Russia. Next week, secrets, spies and useful idiots. We'll introduce you to key players accused of being compromised by Russia.
That hoax story obsessed America's media for more than 3 years, with all these fake claims that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 election by hacking the computers of rival Hillary Clinton and releasing embarrassing emails. He knew all about it. And also that Russia might have blackmailed Trump over an encounter with Russian prostitutes. Well, the media was desperate for this to be true. They pretended it was true, even if they weren't sure it was true. They were gagging for it to be true.
He may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
This president needs to be impeached.
You're confident that at least some Trump associates will wind up in jail?
If I was betting, I would say yes.
Well, I think they're all going to end up together in prison.
I'm talking about the entirely legitimate question of whether Donald Trump could be compromised by the Russian government.
Oh, but the poor dears. A year-long investigation by a former FBI boss concluded that there was no collusion, and now a special counsel, John Durham, is investigating how the material behind these collusion claims was put together. And the results so far are dynamite. 3 people already being charged for lying. Now, the claims against Trump came from a dossier prepared by a former British spy, Christopher Steele, whose primary source was Igor Danchenko, an analyst who has now been arrested and charged with lying to the FBI about where and how he got his startling information. I tell you what, the FBI will be feeling like fools because Steele gave them this dossier, smearing Trump, and they used it to get court orders allowing them to spy on Trump's team before Trump became president. But then the 39-page indictment against this Danchenko suggests the claims in this dossier that he provided information for, they were actually built on exaggerations, rumours and outright lies. And it seems that some of the material in it from Danchenko originally came from an operative linked to both the Democrat Party and the Democrats' Hillary Clinton. She actually inscribed a little thank you note in a book to one of the people behind the dossier. Thank you. Not necessarily for the false information, but, you know. So it didn't come from Russia at all, as claimed. And that is one of the charges now against Danchenko, that he lied. And what's more, the British spy who put together this dossier, Christopher Steele, was in fact paid by the lawyers for the Democrats. And it was then leaked to BuzzFeed News in 2017. And that started the whole media feeding frenzy. All those claims that Trump had colluded with Russia and asked prostitutes to do disgusting things. And it seems some FBI agents were only too keen to push this along to take down Trump as well. In fact, Trump's former director of national security said this week that the top intelligence chiefs under President Barack Obama, who was still in office when this dossier was being shopped around, knew from the start it was a con, but just let it run.
We had specific intelligence that Hillary Clinton was creating a plan to vilify Donald Trump, to falsely accuse him of ties to Russia. And the intelligence community and the FBI knew this. And President Obama, Vice President Biden were briefed by John Brennan and James Clapper and Jim Comey in early August of 2016. And John Solomon's earlier point was right. It all should have stopped at that point. Everything related to the Steele dossier was known to be untrue, but yet it was the predicate for moving forward with an unjust, unfair, and ultimately now everyone accepts a criminally negligent investigation against the Trump campaign.
As I said, what the ABC hailed as a story of the century, one that destabilised Trump's presidency for years, seems instead to be the hoax of the century. But journalists were so keen to believe these crazy claims that America's top journalism award, the Pulitzer, was given to reporters from the two newspapers which pushed this hoax hardest, the left-wing New York Times and Washington Post. Do you think the ABC will now say sorry for reporting fake news? For running a podcast for months pushing this hoax? Russia, are you listening? Or are some lies just too useful to the left to disown? I spoke a short while ago to Sky News US correspondent Annelise Nielsen and asked her what the allegation was and how big this fake story was when Trump was president.
This was huge at the time, the allegation that Donald Trump stole the election, because for many people it was a complete surprise that he came into office. There was the suggestion that something had happened, and so this really fit that narrative, the idea that there was collusion, and the media coverage was so febrile around Donald Trump. People were so angry and upset. You can see that that would set up that kind of situation where they're looking for stories to try to take this guy down, and they think, look, there's got to be stories out there. And so you'd be more inclined to believe a dossier like this when it comes across your desk. You'd say, look, this kind of fits the bill because I don't like that guy. And so, yeah, look, I think this all seems on par, and so we'll run with it. And perhaps there wasn't the level of scrutiny that there should have been on what was in this dossier. But these charges really upend so many of the assumptions that were made around this dossier in the first place. The charges are that the original source didn't get his information by legal means, and that's where he's in trouble with the FBI. It shows also how different the time is, that now we've got taken a breath and taken a step back from what was just the height of so much anger about Donald Trump coming into office, that there wasn't a lot of objectivity around what they were looking at.
Now, that special counsel that's been appointed to look into this, he's now charged a man called Igor Danchenko with 5 counts of lying to the FBI in 2017, when the FBI was pursuing this allegation that Donald Trump has somehow colluded with Russia to steal the election. How important is this development, this charging of Igor Danchenko?
This is a huge development. This really just upends the entire dossier, which was held up as being self-evident in many aspects at the time. And so this is why this is such a significant thing, because if they say, look, the information that was handed on wasn't substantive and that was known to be fake, and then was then extrapolated on and then put into this dossier that was then leaked and used to such political advantage, there's so many different layers of how that can influence what's supposed to be a pretty sacred process of electing a president, and you don't want that kind of opportunity for political operatives to be using different layers of secrecy to try and put this information out there if it is indeed fake. But what the critical question is this being done under that cover to then feed that information through, and where is the opportunity for real scrutiny of this information so it's not used in that way? So the allegation is that Danchenko got that information potentially without the correct authority, and then handed it on in a way that was then altered. And that's quite a serious allegation. And then if each person in this situation is running away with this information, then it becomes inaccurate and then is reported on as accurate. But one of the really critical things here is these are still just allegations. This is a charge that's been laid, and it's about whether he lied to the FBI or not. And that's a very, very difficult thing to prove. So it's not certainly a fait accompli, but there's enough information here to cast a lot of doubt on something that was held up as being a really critical factor of the campaign against Donald Trump and undermining that whole election and saying that there was Russian collusion.
Annelise, there have been allegations by Trump supporters for a long time now that this Christopher Steele dossier, this ex-British spy that used the information from Igor Danchenko, was actually paid for ultimately by the Democrat Party to support it, and then was fed to the FBI like, no, it's nothing to do with the Democrats. This is genuine intel. Is that the picture that is emerging here from what we know of the special counsel's investigation?
Look, the one thing we do know is two wrongs don't make a right. And so it would be one thing to say that they ran away with these accusations and that that was done with political intent. It wouldn't be fair to then take it as at Donald Trump's word, the exact opposite accusation being thrown back at the Democrats about this. And so I think the one thing we can say after all this is you need proof, and you need publicly substantiated proof before you start going after accusations like that. Is it possible? Absolutely. Would there be motive? You betcha. But that is a huge accusation, and you'd want to see some kind of money trail. You'd want to see some kind of evidence in the way of a perhaps confession or something, or just something that you can verify, because that is a very serious allegation. So there's any chance that they did find that. They tried to launder it through the FBI, but we're going to need to see some evidence before you can start saying that that's the truth.
And yet, for 3 years or more, we had the media running away with this story that Donald Trump did collude with Russia. There is no hard evidence of that at all. We've had already a previous special investigator look at that in the Mueller report. Now I've got these allegations that, well, in fact, there was a lying to the FBI about it, and there were links, in fact, to the Democrat campaign in the peddling of this stuff. Donald Trump has since written to the Pulitzer Committee asking it to take away the Pulitzer Prize it gave to the New York Times and the Washington Post that peddled this story for years. Does he have a point that this prize should be withdrawn from those two newspapers now?
Look, he could have a point, but the investigation that needs to take its course, the charges need to be held up, and then he might have a point, because this is an investigation. This is the dossier that has been completely substantiated on what could be fabrications. And if that is the case, that is the kind of thing where there should be some kind of backtracking on exactly what recognition it was given. Interestingly, Washington Post has been covering this. It hasn't gotten as much media attention here as you might have expected. Fox News has been covering it, but broadly speaking, we really haven't seen much analysis of it at all. It seems like people are quite spooked about how this whole thing has played out, and probably didn't anticipate that this level of subterfuge could have existed in something as serious as this. So this is going to be seismic when it happens, when they do make that decision. But until then, everyone's still just kind of waiting to see how this all plays out.
Well, I'm much older than you, perhaps. Well, I am much older than you. And I have to say that I've become more sceptical about it. And I think the reason the New York Times and the Washington Post and a lot of the establishment media have not been given this much attention is because they don't want to admit that they were lying to the American public or colluding in a lie for years to bring down Donald Trump. That's my opinion, and we shall see whether they actually do ever report this with the seriousness it deserves.